What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the first-person shooter tutorial series, we are going to start setting up allies or friendlies in our game. So what I mean by this is we have our character that we're controlling. That's who is firing our weapon, we're walking around with them, right? Then we have enemies, which are the ones we're trying to defeat. They have a health bar above them, and we can actually do enough damage to them to eventually defeat them. And we may also want allies or friendlies, which are teammates that are typically controlled by AI to assist us with the other enemies or other tasks in the game. So the first thing we need to do is actually create a class for our allies or our friendlies. And then once we do this, we can, of course, make them do tasks, give them properties such as health, the ability to go down, so on and so forth. So we're going to be setting up a basic friendly today. We're going to create the class and we're going to spawn a character in the world, or really in the level. We're also going to be going over an example of how to create and add a component in the C++ class and then see that component in the blueprint that we create. This will just be a demo because we are going to be doing a lot of this in the future, so I felt I should add it in here before we get too heavy into that. Now before we get started, if you want to get caught up in the series and check out how we've done everything so far, from our projectile effects, minimap, enemies, and all that fun stuff, I'll link you to the entire playlist of the first-person shooter tutorial series right here in the top right corner. Alternatively, if you just care about the allies or the friendlies, I do recommend you watch the episode on enemies because they're going to be very similar. So you can learn some of the differences between allies and enemies from a coding standpoint if you're interested. I'll link the first episode of enemies in the first-person shooter tutorial series right here in the top right corner. Now with that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. So this is a code and blueprint tutorial series. We're going to be creating a code class and then a blueprint class today. So we're going to be interacting with both pretty evenly. This will be more code than blueprint though. We're just going to be assigning values in the blueprint. We'll be doing all the logic in the code. First things first, we need to make a C++ class for this character. So I'm going to go to my C++ classes, go to where I want to put this class. For me, it's in just my regular folder. I'm going to right click, select new C++ class. This works in Unreal Engine 4 and Unreal Engine 5. And then you can select character right here. So character is a type of pawn that includes the ability to walk around. Well, our character will be walking around, and we also want different things such as collision and movement states with it. So character is a good starting point. So you can select this class, hit next, and then put whatever name you want in here. I called mine base ally. You could call it base friendly, select your path, and then go ahead and create the class. I can't do this because I already have made the class, but otherwise you'd be able to hit it here. I'm going to close out of this window. Now, if you launched Unreal through Visual Studio, like I did, then it's going to take a second. It will add your class to the corresponding spot, but you might have to restart your instance of Unreal or close out of it entirely. Whether you do or don't doesn't matter, as long as once you're done, you end up getting these files, which are the files of the class that you made. So specifically baseally.cpp and baseally.h. So coming in here now, we have baseally.h. Everything you see highlighted here, which is pretty much the entire file, was already filled out when I made a child of the character class. I organized things a little bit, but otherwise it's pretty much exactly the same. The only thing that I added for the current time is this right here, which we'll get into in a minute or two. But this class starts with your constructor, setup player input component function, the begin play and tick overridden functions, and your generated body macro. Now, constructor we are going to want because we're going to assign our values to our variables when we start the game and spawn this ally. And begin play could be very useful to us as well. Tick will be very useful to us. Setup player input component is good for when you want to bind inputs that a player presses to an action. If we're not going to have the player interacting with this character via input, meaning they can't control the character, we're not possessing that ally character and controlling them, we don't need this function, and because of that I am going to remove it just to make our lives a little bit easier. So I'm going to get rid of that. And then if we go to our baseally.cpp file, everything you see in this file, except these three highlighted lines, is logic that came from the template. I did not add it. So basically, it is just doing all the default behavior for these functions. Again, we can remove setup player input component in the CPP because we removed it from the header file. So this is what your two files should look like for base ally or base friendly. Now we want to add a character mesh to this because we may have some default behavior and functions in here, but we need a way to visualize this character. When you make your FPS template, you have a blueprint character that already has a mesh in there by default. I want to make a skeletal mesh because very likely it's going to be a person or some sort of creature that has a rig and a mesh on it, and I want to play animations on them. So I want a skeletal mesh in my ally class. So I've made a variable that is of uSkeletalMeshComponent pointer, and I've called it character mesh. This class keyword here is a forward declare. It means we don't have to go up here and include skeletal mesh component. We can just write class, and it will search for the corresponding file that it's in, and then I can use it down below this section of the file going forward. I did it this way because this is how Unreal does it for their components by default, but if you'd rather have an include up here, that's perfectly fine. I believe the include is include components / skeletal mesh component, and it is .h. So you could do that here, then you could remove this class keyword if you want. Just showing you some options. Anyway, getting back on track here, so we have our character mesh, and I have it as a U property so we can see it in the blueprint, but also edit some things about it. So it's visible anywhere with blueprint read only, so we can see it within the blueprint. It has a category of character. Go ahead and change this to ally, just so I can stay consistent. It has meta equals allow private access equals true. You realized I put this in the protected space. This means only this class and children of this class can access this variable. So to see it in blueprint classes, which are children of this class, we need to allow private access to it using this line right here. Once we have our character mesh created, we can go into the base ally.cpp. And in the constructor, we want to set up our default values for our components. So first thing we need to do is actually create a skeletal mesh component, right? We have this pointer, this variable here, but we don't have an actual object on the character. To do that, we use the create default subobject function. So character mesh equals create default subobject. We have to determine what type to pass in here, and that is our uSkeletal mesh component, because that's the type of component we're trying to create right now. Then this next part in parentheses here is text character mesh. This is what it's going to show up as in the blueprint. Once we've created the object, we need to determine where it should actually go. And we can do that using setup attachment. So we have character mesh, arrow, setup attachment, and I'm going to attach it to the root of this character. We can do that by simply typing get root component. This is something that exists on a character, which is the class that all characters derive from. See, a base ally is a child of a character. So this will get our root component, and we'll directly attach the skeletal mesh to that. When you're ready, you can go ahead and launch the editor again, or hot reload, or live code, however you're doing it. And we want to go into the editor, and we want to go to somewhere we can make a blueprint for this. For me, I have my blueprints in this first person folder. So first person blueprints, and I have an enemy folder in here, so I'm going to right click and make a new folder. I'm going to call this ally or friendly. Go in here. I'm going to add a new blueprint class in here. We're going to go to all classes and search for a new class, which is base ally. Select it, and then we can type base ally BP. So this is our blueprint class. It's a child of our base ally code class. Now when we come in here, we have self. This is the actor itself. Then we have the capsule component that starts as the root component for all characters. Also in characters, you have your arrow component. Then we have the character mesh, skeletal mesh component that we created, and then we have a default skeletal mesh component that's in here because characters have this by default. Now it's up to you if you want to use the default skeletal mesh component that's on the character. It is good to know how to make a skeletal mesh component or any component and attach it to a root component, which is the point of this example, but just be aware of that. You don't actually need to. This is what I was mentioning earlier. It's just a helpful demonstration to add things to our class. So now that you've seen what that looks like, you can go ahead and remove your skeletal mesh component if you don't want to have this one in the code. Again, there could be a time and a place for it, but if you don't need it, you don't have to include this. Just getting you familiar with creating C++ classes and then filling out blueprints after them, because a lot of times in the series we make a C++ class, we make a blueprint, we add components in here. So now I'm going to go ahead and launch this project again. Alright, so now I'm back in the editor. I want to go back to the blueprint that I had made. So blueprints, ally, base ally BP. And I want to go to open full blueprint editor. I'll take everything out of here to begin with, nothing in the graph, because we don't need anything like that right now. We can go to the viewport, we can go to our character mesh component, and we can add a skeletal mesh asset on the right hand side here over in the details panel. We can go ahead and use our Ybot if we want. This is our character skeletal mesh. So I'll position it in a good spot, where the collision is. I'm going to change my snap size here to 5 so that I have a little bit more control over this, and that looks pretty good. Now I want to rotate my character 90 degrees on the Z, and let's make that -90 actually. There we go, so now we're facing the same way as the arrow component. We don't need to give them an animation blueprint yet because we will create our own, but if you want, you could set up the standard. Lastly, let's go ahead and change the materials so that they look different than our first-person character. So I will put on a different material here. I have quite a bit in here. Let's just pick one at random. Let's use the first-person projectile material. And there we go. We have a yellow ally Y-bot in here. We can go to the level that we want. The first-person CPP, maps, first-person example map. This is the map that we have by default in our game. And if I want, I can add an ally back here in this corner, go back to the blueprint, and drag it in. It appears above the ground. We can go back to our level, save the map, play from the main menu, go to the campaign, and here is our little ally, just chilling in the back here. So now we have our class and we're ready to implement some behaviors and functionality on this ally. So you can see our path forward from here. We have plenty to do with AI, both for friendly and enemy. If this video helped you set up your friendly characters and you're excited to see more, then please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and I really appreciate it. I also want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership, Patreon, and Discord subscribers. You guys are fantastic, and I really love all the support. I'm so excited that you're excited about this series, just like I am. So thank you guys so much. If you ran into any problems while following this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. There's a link in the description, and I would be happy to help you. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.